This is the 8GB M3 MacBook Pro, and it's the one that lots of people are really angry about. In this video, I'm going to tell you they're wrong, and I think it's really good. No, don't go anywhere. I promise it will make sense. As we head into 2024, you might be considering buying an M3 MacBook Pro. I did that last year, and it was this incredibly expensive £4,400 M3 Max 14-inch version. I bought it to replace my massive 16-inch edition, and it was worth it, 100%, but it's just so much money. And that means you can quite easily spend the wrong amount of money on a MacBook Pro. And there are some challenges as well. This 8GB M3 MacBook Pro has caused such a stink. Why is Apple selling an 8GB MacBook Pro? Who's it for, if it is for anyone? And at what point do you start speccing up? In this video, I'm going to answer all of those questions. But first, a very quick word from today's sponsor, which is RoboForm. RoboForm is basically a password manager. It keeps all of your login credentials, your secret notes, all of the stuff that you don't want people to see very, very safe. And it does it in the most affordable way. I've never found a password manager that is as good value as RoboForm. But basically, if you're fed up of forgetting passwords, or worse still, you've got your passwords in a spreadsheet or written down somewhere, this is the sort of thing that you need. It's also cross-platform, so if you have a Mac and an Android device and a Windows machine, etc., RoboForm will work across all of those different platforms. They also have a no breach history, so your data is completely safe, and it is ridiculously easy to use. They've got this one-click login feature which literally does that. You click a button and you're in straight away. You can share passwords with friends and family very securely and very easily, and they have an emergency access feature. So if you can't get into the password manager yourself, if something's happened and you're not around basically, then you can give your access details to someone who's trusted and they can get into those details for you. And I've worked with RoboForm to get you a massive discount. So if you don't want to miss out on that, it is for a limited time only. Just click that link below. Okay, the case for this 8GB M3 MacBook Pro. Please hear me out, because I know a lot of people don't understand why Apple is offering 8GB of memory in 2024 on a professional laptop. And firstly, this base model M3 MacBook Pro is cheaper than the one it replaces. And it comes with this new design, which we first saw in 2021. It replaces the touch bar version of the base model MacBook Pro, and you get a lot for it. So you get this lovely chunky retro feel, which I'm a very big fan of, and the port situation is fantastic. MagSafe, that has returned, and also HDMI and an SD card slot. And you also get, I nearly forgot, sorry, you also get this lovely ProMotion Retina display, which if you haven't seen this on the new MacBook Pro, you're in for a treat. But the sticking point is the memory. I still run this business on an 8GB M2 15-inch MacBook Air, and it never puts a foot wrong. I don't do any production work on it, so all of the production work, video editing, audio editing, that sort of stuff happens on this beast. But for everything else, which, let's be honest, is 80% of what this business is run on an 8GB MacBook Air. The problem we have with 8GB in this laptop is that it has MacBook Pro on the base. But there's two reasons Apple offers this 8GB MacBook Pro. I think the first one, and we don't know this for definite because they don't break down their sales figures to individual models basically, but I think there's a lot of people, a lot of businesses in particular, who will buy this exact spec in bulk. You imagine if you've got a great big team of people who need MacBook Pros, but they're not hanging on every single second of production time, this is a very good buy. Secondly, and going back to what I was saying a minute ago about me running this business on an 8GB MacBook Air, Apple knows that some people just want the cheapest MacBook Pro there is. They want the kudos of having a MacBook Pro, but they don't want to spend, 4,400 quid on something like this. And as I've always said, if you just want a MacBook Pro, that's absolutely fine. fine. No one can tell you any different, it's your decision, and you'll be amazed by what you can do with 8 gigabytes of unified memory. And to put this in perspective, I have a little test that I do with new Macs, and if you've been watching this channel for a little while, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. If you haven't been watching it at all and you've got no idea who I am, basically I take a piece of 10-minute 4K footage from this camera, which is a Sony FX3. I throw it into Final Cut Pro and I do two things. The first thing is a render and the second thing is an export, and I time both of those tasks. There's two things to bear in mind with this. One is that it's not particularly accurate. It's nowhere near as in-depth and technical as a proper benchmark. And two, you should not base your buying decision on these results. Now, this 8GB M3 MacBook Pro did the render in 1 minute and 39 seconds and the export in 4 minutes and 57 seconds. They're both very respectable times, and the total time, if you add them both together, obviously, is 6 minutes and 36 seconds. And that is just 2 minutes and 36 seconds slower than this. And this one has 64 gig of unified memory and a completely spec'd up M3 Max chip. And 2 minutes 36 seconds is roughly what it takes me to walk downstairs to make a cup of tea and then come back upstairs. It's no time at all. So at £1,699, I think the M3 MacBook Pro, the base model version with 8 gigabytes of unified memory, is a very good computer. However, some people do need to upgrade. The base model M3 MacBook Pro is not for everyone, and we do have options, which is why it's not worth setting your trousers on fire about that one. I do have another theory though, which is that the 16GB upgrade to the base model M3 MacBook Pro is the sweet spot for a lot of people, and it only takes the price up to £1,899, which for a very capable MacBook Pro is still very good money. Now for that you still get 512 gig of SSD storage. For some people, in fact for most people, I think if you're spending 1,800, 1,900 quid on a laptop, another £200 to get 1 terabyte probably makes sense. It just gives you enough headroom, and anyway you can add loads of SSD storage externally if you need to. That's what I do all the time. That said, I wouldn't expect massive gains in performance between the 8GB and the 16GB version of the M3 MacBook Pro. I've never tested the 16 gig one, but I have tested the 16 gig M3 iMac. I know people get very nervous about me moving iMacs around, but they're perfectly fine, don't worry. Let's just turn it on. Should have logged this in before filming this, really. I did the exact same Final Cut Pro test that I mentioned earlier on this 16 gig M3 iMac, and the reason I did that is because a few weeks ago I did a test between the Intel 27-inch iMac and the base model M3 iMac, and the Intel iMac beat the base model M3 iMac at the export test. And lots of people called me an idiot because it wasn't fair, apparently, because the Intel iMac had 32 gig of RAM and the base model M3 iMac had 8. So I got hold of this 16 gig version of the M3 iMac, and this did the export in the exact same time as the 8 gigabyte version. But this is the point. We've reached this stage with Apple Silicon where all of this stuff is really fast. If you've only got the budget for the 8 gigabyte MacBook Pro, you will absolutely love it, trust me. If you've got any movement in your budget at all, I would go for that 16 gig upgrade, and if you can, the 1 terabyte of SSD storage, but don't expect big performance gains. When it comes to the M3 Pro and M3 Max, you know if you need that power. Just don't be swayed by those bright lights of the Pro and the Max versions, because if you're asking yourself if you need them, you probably don't. But there is something else to bear in mind, which brings me back to this. Now, the reason this M3 iMac is in this video about a MacBook Pro is because I think it might be right for you. Firstly, it made my list of the best Macs of the Apple Silicon generation because the M3 version is just utterly wonderful. And if you're the sort of person who buys a MacBook Pro, and I'm not judging you for this by the way, but if you buy a MacBook Pro and then it spends 99% of its life in a dock or just beneath a monitor, I'd get this instead. You do pay a bit more for the iMac, but you get a bigger display, it's tidier, and if you don't need any portability, you just don't need a MacBook Pro. If that's piqued your interest, I'll put a link above to a video that you might find interesting, but before we go, there is something we need to discuss. 2024 needs to be a big year for the Mac. Apple Vision Pro it's weeks away. In fact, it's probably days away by the time you watch this, and I knew this was going to happen. Apple has just announced that Vision Pro will be available in the US on the 2nd of February. That means that for the Mac to remain in people's minds for this year, it needs to shout as loud as possible. And the problem we have with that is that there are several Macs missing in action from the M3 chip. Now, I am running the risk of this video going out right after Apple does a big announcement, which normally happens, but I'll take the risk. Basically, the Mac Mini, the Mac Studio, the MacBook Air, and the Mac Pro don't have the M3 chip yet. And if you really want one of those machines and they haven't arrived by the time this video has gone live, if they have, by the way, happy days. But if that hasn't happened, I think you need to hold out until at least, I'm afraid, June. Because that's when WWDC happens, and we may see something there if we don't see it before. And we do need the big replacement for the 27-inch Intel iMac. I know from the comment sections on my videos that loads of you want that big iMac now. What I'd love to know though is what Mac you're buying in 2024. Let me know down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and give me a little cheeky subscribe. It makes a massive difference to this channel. And if you want more Mac content from me, keep watching for a link to another video.